talk today. I typically talk with lots of designers who are getting started in UX, which is a very different audience, but also kind of the same, right? So you have like a basis of designing things, you want to learn more, you want to do a better job. And the secret is everyone in this room is actually a designer, whether you have that in your title or not, right? The reason that I say that is there are lots and lots of software that you can use, where if you were to ask the founders of that software, hey, do you have any UX professionals? They would say, no, we don't hire designers. But at the end of the day, the people that are using your software don't care whether you have designers or just developers or anything in between. They just experience the software, right? There is no abstraction from design to the software. Someone makes decisions, someone decides there are buttons or no buttons, someone decides what they look like. So whether you have a designated designer title or not, you're also a designer. All right, so what are we talking about today? First and foremost, I'll pick up where Mikhail left off. My name is Kelli Lucas. I am Chief Design Officer and Co-Founder at LunarLab. LunarLab is a local to Birmingham product strategy and UX design firm. We help companies build better products, to keep it short and sweet. I have spent the last many moons designing software. I have a graphic design background, but then I moved into UX and UI design roles, worked in everything from mobile apps, web apps, desktop apps, and kind of everything in between. I started off, like I said, in graphic design, moved into more of a UX role, which I have been doing for years and years now. Really enjoy it, and like I said, I'm really excited to talk to everybody today about why we're here. So what is UX? These are some of the things we're going to cover today. Why should you care about UX? What are some basic UX laws that you can put into practice after today? Some UI basics that you can also put into practice. And then I'll leave some time at the end for some questions. I hope everyone in here came prepared for lots of questions. Any topics that you're interested in me talking about, I'll try to leave some room at the end to kind of discuss some of those. But first, and this is probably a good time to go ahead and get your food because I'm just going to be sharing something up here, but I also want some feedback. I would love for people to talk, raise their hands, talk about it. So we're going to start today by playing a little game. Who likes games? Oh no, I forgot to log into, hang on. Helps if I turn on my Wi-Fi first. What'd you say?
Internet? Yeah, can I do it?
So?
Oh, boy.
Is that not working? It says I'm on the internet.
Oh, and you have to click the.
What'd you say?
Once you click the link, right, if you're leaving.
Jeez, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, so this is a really well-designed site. I hope you can see it. This is how we're not going to design things, okay? This is an absolutely terrible experience. I'm going to show you why. So hi, and welcome to User in Your Face, a challenging exploration of user interactions and design patterns. So play the game. We're going to fill in this form together, okay? But we're going to click the no button, which does absolutely nothing. Okay, click here. Where? Here to go to the next page. I'm not sure which part is clickable. There we go, we get to guess. So, okay, something's screaming at me already. Is that a problem? No, not really. Okay, let's fill in a form. Uh-oh. It's also timing us, by the way. Where should I click? What should I start on, right? Anyone else confused? Anyone else used an actual site that kind of behaves like this, where you're like I said, you know, there's buttons, there's links, there's checkboxes, all the things that you would normally see in UI. This one's just done really terribly. So let's do a password. We're going to go with, oh boy. All right, let's try that again. Password 123, really secure, right? All right. Yeah, isn't it? And it also looks like a placeholder text, right? I just typed in something, I don't know what's going on. All right, so we're gonna do my email, and I'm gonna use my actual email, if I can. Kelli at LunarLab. Okay. And we're going to go with this close down here. There we go. Okay, let's try this one more time. Oh, my placeholder text once again is getting in my way. All right, lunarlab.io. So let's see if that's, okay, so I can't actually even put in my email address. This is really fun so far, right? All right, so we're gonna go with .org because why not? So the main button here is cancel. Would you like to redo that whole process? I know. Okay, so we're gonna go to next. Oh, don't forget to accept the cookies, which I don't know where those went anyway. Okay, so point being, who had fun? Would you like to go fill in a 30-page form like that? No, right? Everyone would rip their hair, eyes, and everything else out. So we're not going to do that. So again, what is UX and why should I care? Do you think a UX designer worked on that? Who knows, right? There's probably some like evil designer who actually put that together. But that is an actual experience that you might see on lots and lots of websites. Who has ever gone to a website that looked really fancy and you couldn't find the navigation anywhere? Like maybe you had to like use the arrows or I don't know, do a happy dance to like get it to go to the next page. We also don't want to do that, right? It's important that when people come to your site or your product that it is very easy to use. That is kind of the premise of UX, user experience design. You want to make sure people know what to do, that it's very usable, that it also serves a purpose. No one is going to use a product that does nothing for them. Like I said, why should I care? I kind of touched on this earlier. If you're a developer, it is also important that you understand the basics of design. Like I said, what is UX? It's short for user experience. This just has to do with the way that people behave when they use your products. How usable are they? How delightful is that experience? How frustrating was that experience? People come away from those product interactions with some kind of feeling about it, whether it's positive or negative. We want to make products suck less, right? Make them better. Why? I said I would tell you the why behind it. One of the reasons is it reduced development costs. If you have someone thinking through the design, how things come together, the flow of everything, it can significantly reduce your development costs. Also can lead to faster development time. Who has ever worked on a product that had like 37 different button styles, right? How much better would it be to just have one? How much quicker would that make your changes? If I came to you tomorrow and I'm your designer and I say, okay, I want button number 1 to be orange, and I want it to be an Arial, and I want button number 2 to be Helvetica, and I want it purple, and I want that one rounded. Like that's a lot of effort, right? Versus just saying, hey, we're going to tweak this one button in one place, and it's going to change everywhere. Can also lead to fewer bugs. If someone is thinking through the way that all of this stuff comes together, you can intuitively build those processes and those components in a way that reduces bugs, reduces errors, can also increase user retention. That's one of the main goals. You want people coming back to your product. You want them to have a good experience with it. And then the very last one, higher performance and software stability. While this isn't directly due to design or lack of designer, it's important because these people are using your software every day. So if it's unstable, if it's really, really slow, that impacts the user experience. And while I can't determine those things, you all can. So it's important to just remember that someone's experiencing your product at the end and to do it, to design that well. All right, so let's look at some metrics. This is just to reiterate why this is all really, really, really important. 88% of people don't return to a website after a bad experience. I hope I never have to open user interface ever again, although it is good for iterating these reasons. So 67% of mobile users are more likely to make a purchase if they like the experience offered by your site. So if you're selling things, e-commerce, it's all that more important. And then this last little figure I think is incredibly interesting. 1 out of 26 will complain when they're unsatisfied with a site or experience, but 91% of those customers will just leave. You won't hear about them. No one's going to take the time to send an email and say, hey, your product was really terrible, or I really hated all of this. It was really frustrating. They're just going to leave. That's a lot of money left on the table if you're a business owner. So let's talk about some basic UX laws. This sounds really official. It sounds like, you know, an edict determined from up on high, but it's really just some guiding principles that you can use that are all based in various areas of UX. If you don't know much about that, UX is kind of an all-encompassing term, but it has roots in lots of different things. As part of UX, it is all human-centered, right? Humans have psychological behaviors and cognitive biases that we have to consider. So a lot of these like UX laws are actually based in psychology. They're not, we didn't, you know, decide that a lot of this exists just for UX. So number one, Jacob's Law, if you have not heard of this one, very interesting. Users spend most of their time on other sites. This means that users prefer your site to work well and work the same way as other sites. This touches on what I mentioned earlier about the navigation, right? Don't just recreate the wheel just for fun. People have mental models for the things that they have used in the past. Consistency is key, and I don't mean consistency just for the sake of consistency, but everyone knows how a hamburger menu operates, or does at this point, right? Don't just randomly change things because you want it to look different. And I'm speaking as much to designers as anyone else. It is important that people know how to navigate, you know, perform any of the tasks in your site that they need to. Just don't confuse people. That leads to frustration. It also leads to inefficiency if they're trying to complete a task. They need to know where to click. They need to know what to do next. Second law, Hick's law, takes time to make a decision, and it increases with the number of choices that you have. If you have ever filled in a really, really long form, the more confusion that goes into that form while you're trying to complete it, the longer it takes, the more frustrated people get. So as part of any design that you're creating, try to minimize the choices that people have. And I don't mean, you know, try to keep them from it. Also break them into smaller steps. Any kind of big long forms, you can always break them into kind of an onboarding process, like question number 1, let's fill in this one, and then move to the next one. Usability heuristics. So this is a way to prevent errors from occurring in the first place. We want to, as part of our design, minimize any kind of errors people can perform when they're filling in something. Think about especially form fields. If you need someone to fill in their phone number, make sure you're using the input that is for numbers, right? That way, someone doesn't type in their name and it just accepts it on the back end, and then you've got a bunch of mess to clean up, okay? Miller's Law. The average person can only keep 7 ±2 items in their working memory. This is not a magical number. It's just kind of a general rule of thumb. Think about navigation on a site. If you were to take Nike, for example, Nike's website for shoes, what if the homepage was every single shoe that they have? Like, where would you even start, right? So it's always helpful if you're thinking about a website, break it down into just a handful of things that people can pick through to get where they're going. And this just kind of helps funnel people through various areas of your site or your product. You know, the less the merrier, really, in this respect. Keeps things simple, keeps people from having to think. And I think that's kind of an unwritten law of UX. Like, don't make people think, just make it simple. Aesthetic usability effect. This is kind of interesting. People perceive things that are beautiful to also be easy to use, but we don't want to stop there. We don't want it to just look easy to use or look pretty. We want it to really also work. So form and function, not just one or the other. Von Restorff effect. I might be mispronouncing that, but we're going to pretend like I'm not. Also known as the isolation effect. This predicts that when multiple similar objects are present, the one that differs from the rest is most likely to be remembered. So what do I mean there? There's a reason that buttons look like buttons, right? If you're looking at one screen, that should draw your attention to the next thing that you should do. So you want something that's really important to look different than the other things around it that helps people remember what it is they're looking for and looking at. All right, so enough about, you know, philosophy. Let's talk about how that translates into the UI. Color. This is always a huge one. Especially when I'm talking to developers, they typically say, I don't know where to start with color. You know, I picked some random colors, I stuck them in there, they look terrible. The first key to color is don't try to do it yourself. If you look or Google, design palettes or pretty UI palettes, just use one out of the box that someone else has already put together. That'll save you some time. But then once you have that palette, these are some basic rules for applying it. You might have heard the 60-30-10 rule. This has to do with the neutral colors on a site versus the very vibrant things on your site that should direct people's attention. So in the example up here, you can see the neutral color, this primary color that takes up most of the space. You can see about 30% of the page is the secondary, which happens to be white. And then the thing that's going to draw your eye the most is this buy now. If that buy now was white background with black text, you can imagine how much longer it would take you to find where to tap, right? And all of that introduces friction when you're trying to just get people to do the thing that they need to do, right? You need design to get out of the way, but you also need it to help guide people. I love this quote: if everything stands out, nothing stands out. So if all of this was hot pink on, a bright orange background, that's really intense for your eyes, but you have no idea where to click next. So we want to use color in a really deliberate way. If this was a full desktop site and you've got lots and lots of these cards with different things to buy, you should be able to easily scan each of those items and know where to click. So I want to buy this pair of shoes instead of this pair of shoes, but you need those little buy now buttons to stand out from everything else on the page. It helps direct people on where to go next. And while we're talking about buttons, let's talk more about buttons. Does everyone know that there's a difference between a link and a button? Yeah, some people, right? You'd be surprised the number of designers that don't know this difference, because I see it all the time. It drives me absolutely insane. Links take people places and buttons do things. There's a very big difference between those two. So I've got this example up in the top right that is from Gmail. All of these inbox, start, snooze is just going to take you to different places within your inbox. But compose is launching a new email. The behavior is different. Don't mix those things. If you are in a UI, what you don't want to do is, let's say I click start and it pops up an email. Let's say I click snooze and it does something completely different. So if you style things to do one behavior, make sure you're consistently using that throughout. Anything on your site or your product that looks like a link, make sure it behaves like a link. Anything that is a button, make sure it works like a button. Otherwise, it can just cause confusion. And most people that are using these products aren't going to know immediately that there's something wrong. They're just going to be confused, right? Surprised. They're not sure what is going to happen when they click something, and you want to just encourage the understanding there, encourage behaviors and consistency. So let's think a little bit about how we place the color within a UI and why there might be different styles on a specific button. You want to use color to help direct people. I mentioned that earlier. Actually, let me go to the next slide. There we go. We've got primary buttons, secondary buttons, inactive and disabled buttons. You want to use your primary buttons to allude to where you want users to go next. So this is kind of encouraging them along the path of their task. So any kind of primary button should attract the most attention on a page. It's going to have the most visual weight, the most visual distinction. And like I said, if everything looks the same, then it's not helping anyone. So there's a reason that we use, primary, secondary, tertiary buttons, and it all has to do with focus and attention. Typically, with a primary button, you wouldn't have more than one on a screen at a time. Like I said, that is really, when you think about user behavior and you think about the journeys people are going through, what is the next action you want them to take, or that they're most likely to take? If there's ever a situation where there's a choice, like maybe, I don't know if I have an example on here. Let's say just two actions that you're not necessarily pushing them one way or the other. They kind of have equal importance, and it's 50-50 whether they would go down journey A or journey B. You would use two secondary buttons. And the reason is you don't want to encourage people to take one route versus another. You want to leave the choice up to them. If there is a strong reason that they need to click one versus the other, one would be a primary, one would be the secondary. I thought that, save is a really great example of that. Save and cancel should not have the same visual weight, right? Otherwise, someone might go through all of this work on a form and hit cancel and lose all of their data. So what you want to do is kind of encourage them to take the right path, the path that you think they're most likely to take. And like I said, if you don't have kind of the clarity of what that journey is, give them 2 primary buttons and they can make the choice themselves. So like I said, with secondary buttons, it's less visual weight. And again, you don't really want to encourage one or the other. Inactive or disabled buttons, these can be a little tricky with accessibility, but it's important in certain circumstances to use these. It does allude or kind of suggest to people that there's an action that they could take that would enable that button and allow them to progress. Sometimes, I'm using forms a lot because you see those a lot. Let's say I filled in 5 of the 6 required forms and I'm trying to hit next, but I have to finish that last answer before I can progress. It's a great time to use the disabled button. Again, make sure that you're telling people what to do in order for them to progress to the next step if you are kind of using that for user behavior purposes. And I really like this term, intentional friction. You see it a lot to manage errors. And you'll see this last example down here, the permanently delete. You see this in a lot of products where if it is a permanent action that people can't undo, you really want to make sure that they don't actually hit delete and then it's just gone forever. A chance to say, oh, hang on. So there are times that you do want to introduce friction in a product. You have to be logical about it, you have to be rational about it and careful. It's putting a dialogue up that says, hey, are you really, really, really sure you want to delete this? Yes, okay. Or this particular UI pattern where they have to type in the name. I've also seen it where you can, if I'm trying to delete a project, we'll type your project name. That way you're really making people think through their actions. All right.
So I noticed from the last page, you also weren't using the primary color. Is that the warning color?
Yeah, that's a great question. Color in UI typically has semantic value, particularly red, okay? Something like DoorDash gets away from using red because they're very consistent in all the rest of their UI patterns. But typically you would use red for any kind of destructive actions. You would use green for any kind of success actions. So yes, to your point, red can kind of give people that second pause before they perform an action. It just kind of reiterates that same mental model that I mentioned earlier. You'll see this across lots and lots of websites that have decent design and good UX practices in place. Like I said, red definitely ties back to destructive actions. Selectors. This may seem silly, and everyone in here may know the difference between these 2 things, radio buttons and checkboxes. You would be surprised on a daily basis how many times I see that these are used wrong. So it's time for a pop quiz. Sorry, I didn't tell anyone they had quizzes and tests today. But raise your hand if you have the answer, shout it out, I don't care. In the standard checkbox component, how many items are you allowed to select unless otherwise stated? Yeah, yes, you pass. Hey, we've all learned something. What is the shape of a radio button selector? If you want to make a UI where a user can select multiple toppings to put on an ice cream, what would you use? Yeah, multi-select. What else? Checkbox. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. You win. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yes, chatbot is a very, very logical. NFT, anyone? If you want to make a UI where a user can select what type of bank account they would like to open, what would you use? Radio button. Yeah. They can only select one, right? Like I said, I know this seems really silly, but again, I think Elizabeth mentioned last week that there was a terrible example where it was supposed to be a radio group, but they were actually individual radio button sets with one option where you could actually select all of them. It's yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I think someone mentioned a multi-select box. Is there so that you can use it the same thing as you can use checkboxes for? Is there you use one over the other?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say it depends. As a usual UX professional would always say, it depends. I like checkboxes for a lot of reasons. I think they're typically more accessible than a multi-select. But also, if you want people to be able to see the full list without having to do any like interacting, just let them like read everything. I think checkboxes are a simpler option. If you're tight on space, sometimes a multi-select makes sense. But it's really down to what your preference is. Again, I think just simple checkboxes are easier for people to understand. They don't disappear once you like click out of them, which multi-selects typically do. And a lot of times with multi-selects, if you select too many that are allotted in the space of that select, then it just overflows and the user can't see what they've selected. That answers your question. All right. Oops, too far. Let's talk a little bit about typography. I don't want to go too far into this. You're all developers. You know what H1, H2, H3 paragraph tags are, all of the basics, right? Make sure you're using them consistently. That's really as simple as it is. One of the things that I see quite often, anytime we're doing like a UI redesign for someone, they'll send us their website and it doesn't look bad, but like you'll start to see stuff that's just a little off. And a lot of times what that is either padding or typography. They have 4 or 5 different fonts on one page. They've got different padding around all of their elements. A lot of it isn't aligned right. There's just like lots of things that just look a little bit off, and typography can be a really big one. I like the general rule of just use one single font. There's usually enough variation, weighting, all of that, and font sizes that you shouldn't really need another one. If you really need another one, use 2. Make sure that they match. There are tons and tons of websites online where you can say, hey, pair railway with what font? What goes well with whatever font? And someone's already kind of done that work. So don't feel like you have to start from scratch with like, okay, I have to learn the history of typography. There's lots of cheat sheets online that can help you. Another thing I like to mention with typography is respecting reading line length. That might not be something that you've ever heard of before, and that's totally fine. Imagine I wrote one sentence across this board, and it went like all the way to the other side of the screen. It'd be kind of hard to read, right? It's like just goes and goes and goes. There are lots of studies done around the length of a line and the optimum amount of time that someone would need to read through a line and the speed that they finish the reading. So you like to just make sure that you're falling within the norms. I didn't include any specifics here, but I think it's around 300 characters, give or take. And I think the quick way to kind of cheat that is take the size of your font. Let's say it's 30 pixels. Multiply it by 10, 300. So about 300 characters should be the line length for that size of typography. Like I said, that just helps with like the speed of people reading. Already mentioned, use consistent headings. Consistent padding. Oh my gosh. If you have designed a button, all of your buttons should have the same amount of padding around them, the same margin around them. Make sure that some aren't this long, some are this long, some are this tall, some are this tall. And that goes for typography too. Make sure you're using the same line heights for each of these H1, H2 tags. Make sure they've got the same margins around them. And what that does is it helps with the readability of the page. It helps your scannability. It helps give your eye a moment to pause between text. I have an example here to the right, like create a new job. All the text kind of runs together. There's no way to like scan. This is more like the way you should do it. So create a new job. I don't necessarily have to read all of this, but I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm trying to create a new job, create. So it makes it more scannable, right? I don't have to read every single word and then determine what I need to do. And then one more basic, minimum size, 16. Please don't make anyone get their glasses out just to read your website, okay? So important. There are lots of like SEO things that go into typography, and Google really wants you to design sites that people can actually read and use. So these are kind of best practices that will also help make sure you're not getting dinged negatively by Google, because they will. All right, so I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on icons because this can be a really big friction point in UI. One study shows that for icons with labels, users were able to correctly predict what would happen when they tap the icon 88% of the time. It's pretty good, right? Icons without labels, this number dropped to 60%. And for unlabeled icons that are unique to the app, users correctly predicted what would happen when they tap the icon only 34% of the time. Can be really, really problematic. icons, I love icons. I think they're beautiful, can be beautiful. But you have to use them with your brain, right? Be very rational, be very practical with your use in them. One more pop quiz. All right, let's look at the icons at the top. Anybody want to take a guess at what those are? Yeah, trash can. Disk, search, yep.
Is that saying,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
what's that? Is that a download or is that?
Right here.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. What is it indeed? What do you say? Got a guess?
I would give it a download.
Yeah, so not bad, right? Those, you guys are pretty spot on. We've got delete, I believe that's download, search, and an edit, right? What about the next row? Anyone?
The second one from the left is putting a pine on the window.
Yes, yes, it is a Thanksgiving during COVID. Yeah.
And then signature on the right.
Signature, yeah. What was that?
Those are nothing. That's all.
Yeah. Garbage. This is garbage. We do not want to do that to people. But if we do, we're going to be careful about it. I'm going to tell you how. All right, stick to convention. Please do not use some obscure icon for delete. We all know what delete looks like. It always looks like a trash can. Make it look like a trash can. You don't, like I said, don't make people think. The last thing people really want to do is look at an icon and try to figure out what the heck it means. They just want to do something, right? Get the design out of their way. And I say that as a designer, no one cares what the design looks like as long as it doesn't interrupt what they're trying to do. Nothing says manage like the word manage, right? Anybody want to try to draw an icon for manage and hope that people know what it means? Not easy, right? This is kind of, right? The position of the icon is learned quicker than the icon itself. There is a really interesting study done with Microsoft, I believe it was Microsoft Word. Back when they rolled out that ribbon across the top that has like 1 million icons, you know what people learned? Nobody was looking at the icons. No one. They learned where the icon was. That's all that they cared about. So I say that to say, don't just go redesigning your site for fun. Make sure that people still know where to find things, especially if it's something people are using a lot. But again, make sure that I just lost my spot. Yeah, position of the icon is learned quicker than the icon itself. Use them sparingly and thoughtfully. I touched on this a second ago. If you don't have to use an icon, don't. If it is nice to use and you really want to add some visual interest, it can be great. They can also save room in the UI if you don't want to write a whole long thing. But make sure that you're using some sort of labels with your icons. That's the biggest thing. Again, don't make people think, if I'm going to click on this button, I want to know what it's going to do next. So you can see the two examples here. I would have no idea what this checkbox means. None. I wouldn't know. Actually, these two kind of seem similar to me. There's a random plane. I don't know what it's going to do when I click on that. But with a little bit of extra text, it just makes it a lot clearer where people need to go. Also helps with memory retention. People start to learn these things a little bit better. No one learns anything by just a list of icons. I like this for I like this rule, 5 seconds. If they do not look at your icon and know immediately what it means within 5 seconds, please put some text next to it, okay? Trash can, I think would be about the only one that I would trust to leave it by itself, but even those, there's room to put the word delete. Make room, okay? Also, avoid tooltips. They don't work super well on mobile. Like I said, we don't want to make people think. All right, so some basic recommendations. Yeah. Yeah. So if you don't know a whole lot about UI, that's fine. There are tons and tons of kits that you can use that are kind of pre-built, right? They've got tertiary, secondary, and primary buttons. It's got typography. Some of the ones I've listed here, like Bootstrap, Material Design, Tailwind, all of those out of the box will work really well. You don't have to be a designer to implement a UI kit. But I want you to kind of lean on those laws that I mentioned earlier and basic just UI practices to make sure that you're implementing it correct. Just because you have a button doesn't mean that you need 17 primary buttons across the bottom of your page. Like use some thought around where you place them, why they're placed there. And again, all of UX is all about people's user journey. So you want to design a UI that supports their journey through your application, through your product. We want to make it really seamless. We don't want people to stumble on the design. We don't want people to be confused by a design. Just make it really logical. I don't think that there's anything super fancy to design. It's really just like putting yourself in people's shoes and understanding what it is they might be trying to accomplish, and then designing a UI that supports that best. So I included a couple of books and links here. Nielsen Norman Group has done a ton of research on almost anything you can think of with UX and UI. If you don't have time to do research yourself, or you're wondering, hey, I'm trying to debate between, a side navigation and a top navigation, why would I use one versus the other? Nielsen Norman Group, like I said, has research on just about everything. If you are having an argument at work about why you are advocating for a top nav versus a side, that is like excellent secondary research that you can say, hey, look, actually, this is exactly why. And someone did the research. We don't have to, screw it up first and then learn from it later. Rosenfeld Media has tons and tons of really nice short UX books. They have stuff on UI, and I'm talking, 100 pages. They're super dense with information. They're not fluffy and philosophical. They're very actionable. I think they even have like some UX, I'm trying to say, like curated packages that you can order that has like 4 or 5 books depending on what you're trying to learn. So I can't recommend them enough. And then Medium, oh my gosh, there's so much on Medium, but UX Collective is a great one. If you like to digest just a little bit of stuff at a time and it's free, go to Medium. Some other books that I really like, Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. It's very understandable, easy to read, like very actionable. Design of Everyday Things. It's not specific to UI, but it does talk a lot about how people interact with things. Talks about the really terrible doors that you never know what to push or pull. We don't want that to translate into a website or a product, okay? We don't want people stuck at the door not knowing what to do. And then Refactoring UI is fantastic. They have lots of YouTube videos. They also have a book. But you can kind of watch their thought process when they're redesigning things, and you kind of understand how all of this stuff comes together that I just talked about. So that's a really good resource too. All right, let's talk about some questions. Yes.
Can we go back to the
Yeah.
So,
You're
yeah, this question. So if you, the first site you have, one of the first ones has the Google Gmail interface that does not use a lot of icons, whereas this app, is icon more of like a mobile thing? Like, would you use more icons on mobile because space is limited and you can pay more meaning, or is Google just like, is their UI arguably bad?
That's a really good question. It can't be bad.
I mean, like Gmail itself.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there's a good or bad to using icons in one or the other. Sometimes, like I said, for fairly often used icons, especially on mobile, it can be a space saver. But I wouldn't depend on that to communicate everything you need to. So if it just means that you need to have a little bit more scrolling so that people know what a button or an icon or whatever does, just make the extra room for it. Again, I think that icons generally are more for an aesthetic purpose than really anything else. But I also think people get a little bit icon happy, right? And that can apply to both desktop, mobile, all of the above. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, so don't get icon happy.
Don't get icon happy. Yeah.
Multifunctional, I would say.
Yes, and use that 5-second rule. If you don't know if it's clear, just show it to someone. Like, it can be anyone. Hey, what does this mean? And if you start counting when you ask that question and they're just like, you better put a label there. Any other questions? Yeah.
Going back to that, 1 out of 26 people will complain that 91% leave. How do you continuously audit your interface to make sure that it's giving a good experience?
That is a great question. The way that I like to do this is through regular usability testing. Anyone who has a software product out in the world, or really any kind of product, you should regularly be putting it in front of people and just observing how they use it. what you'll find is, people aren't going to go to your website, fill out a form and say, hey, I got really stuck on this one thing, because they're going to think it's something wrong with them. They're not going to think that it's a bug. They're not going to think there's something wrong with the software. They're just going to be like, I don't know, I guess I'm dumb. And you don't want people to feel like that. So the best way to do that can be really, really simple. You can like flag someone down in the hallway. Hey, let me show you this. Like if it's something that, you're working on, like a travel app and lots of people travel. Super simple. If you've got, more nuanced audiences that use your software, you might have to go through a couple of extra hoops to find some people. But again, the easiest way is just to observe how people find or how people use it. Because I can guarantee, even having done this a long time, the way that I design things is almost never how people actually use them. Almost never. You can think, oh, this is so easy to do, and that first or second person that you're going to sit and watch, you're going to be like, well, that was not anywhere near as clear as I thought it would be. And you don't have to do this for super long. You don't have to do, like, it doesn't have to be some massive research project. It can be like 5 people, 10 minutes using your app. Hey, do this one flow. I need you to like complete this task, and then just observe how they do it. And that's kind of how you know. Especially with software, we're always designing new features. We're always trying to improve things. That's where that feedback really needs to come from, is from your end users, not really from like you just being like, I want to design new buttons. Like no one cares. Just make sure you're talking with people, observing how they use it. And again, all of this needs to be user-centered. So we have to talk to people.
So it's something like Google Analytics where you can track change, like once you've already built something, I guess, would you be able to use like just to see the difference in like retention and flows to see how many people are making it to that second page?
Yeah, you can. Google Analytics or any analytics period is going to tell you what's happening. It's not going to tell you the why, though. So you might notice that, lots of people are making it to that second page, but they're not going any further. Well, you know that there's a problem, but you might not know what it is. You might have a bug in the page that the button doesn't work. So you might just know that something's happening, but I really like to use analytics for a jumping off point to kind of understand what the problem is, why it's happening. That's where that usability session would come in. So you notice that people aren't making it through, step 1, step 2. We'll ask some people to complete that process and see what happens. What's stopping them from doing it? Is it an unclear button? Is there a bug in one of the input fields? Is there like something else going on? So like I said, it can tell you some stuff, but it might not tell you everything. Usually won't tell you everything. What it is good for is if you have like really solidified metrics that you're trying to look at, you're keeping an eye on the number of people who convert over time. Again, if that number starts to dip, that's where your research needs to start, not stop. So, like I said, it's not going to tell you everything.
So you suggested that having a large number of but suppose my application has a large number of functions. How should I divide up buttons that I can just put on one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I used to work in enterprise fintech, and there was almost any number of actions someone could take from any given spot in the UI. So it's not always easy. What you need to do is kind of think through each of those individual flows and try to, if you heard of progressive reveal, it's kind of a UI tactic where you only disclose information at the point that people need to see it. So that can be a really nice way. It's kind of high level talking through it without a visual. But essentially, let's say, they're about to start this one big long flow. Well, at the very beginning, you don't give them every single option. Maybe you know that there's one of 2 avenues that they're going to pursue. So you give them 2 buttons to say, I'm going to go this way, or I'm going to go this way. And maybe once they go through, segment number 2, that's when you show them more options. So just try to make it contextual to the piece of the flow that they're in, rather than saying, well, you can do everything from here. Because there might be 20. That's not uncommon.
B to C with maybe 3 to 5 or so.
Yeah.
Functions on each.
Yeah, like I said, with that kind of magical 7 number, it's not a hard number. But what you don't want to do is on that very first page, they have 40 buttons to read through, because they're going to get overwhelmed and they're going to be like, I don't even know where to start. So you really just want to like dangle a small carrot in front of people and say, hey, go this way or go this way. It's kind of, I think UI is a lot like a maze. Like you really want to like help leave breadcrumbs for people so that they don't just like walk in and get lost immediately.
Do you use anything specifically to develop
Not a specific tool. I mean, I use basic color contrast rules, make sure that, you know, the background color and the text color match contrast standards. That's the biggest one. I know that there's all kinds of automated tools that you can use in a browser to kind of check more than that. A lot of that is on the code side, which I don't typically work on, but making sure that, you know, your buttons have labels, that all of the accessibility pieces that go into the UI are all there. But I don't have any like specific ones that are kind of magical on the design side. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. Let me show you. So this is the one I use, actually. Let's see if it's, hang on. I use this one all the time. Figma actually has some plugins for this, so the design tool I usually use. But this one's a great one. Like, let's say that we have a really light button, really light blue button with white text. All you have to do is drop the hex codes in here, and it'll tell you whether it passes or fails. Super easy. This is really important, like if you're working on a design system, let's say you use Tailwind and you need to check your brand colors, maybe it's a really faint purple, and everyone has said, no, I really like this, you know, lavender purple, and it has to be with white text, and you go to the rest of your team and say, we can't do that. People can't read it. You always have to consider like the context that people are using your software too. I didn't mention this earlier, but I should have. If people are on a mobile device and your product is something for the outdoors, like with a bright light, how well do you think people could see that? Like not at all, right? So definitely consider context. If you're working on an app that's used outdoors a lot, you really should probably like double that contrast compared to what it normally should be.
What should it be? Like what is,
Yeah, let me show you. I believe it's 4.5. I'm checking my memory here. There's different levels of accessibility, AA versus AAA, and AAA, I'm not.
you have to do with accessibility?
It does, yep. So people with low vision can't typically read this kind of stuff really well, and we want to make sure that everyone can use software. Like software can be a gatekeeper to people participating in society, so we want to make sure that people can use things. This is especially important in, you know, the government sector, anywhere where, what's the word I'm looking for? Like ADA compliance is required. Like you could get sued monetarily for using buttons that don't pass accessibility standards and contrast standards. Yeah, there's a lot more to it, but this is just kind of touching on the design side at least.
Yeah, I think we need a whole separate thing to do an ADA talk.
Yes. And I have a ton to learn. Also, I am not a professional by any stretch of the imagination, but I do try to learn and I try to tell people about it because a lot of people don't know. This also goes into what I mentioned earlier about the 16-point font. Like, please make sure you don't go below that for the same reasons. If you're using a size 9 font, no one can read it, including me, and I have pretty good vision. So just make sure you're kind of following the norms. Any other questions? Yeah.
And then it's not pick in, it's just the things I use, but where it's a bunch of feedback from the process. But
Yep.
I was wondering, does that have an actual beneficial for the supplier and to in the UX solve? If I pitch about the UX in that, does that seem to happen?
You know, it's going to depend on the organization, obviously, that has implemented that. There are some strengths to asking for feedback, but I think most important, it's good to weigh the user experience with what it is you're trying to accomplish on the business side, because what probably happened there is, you know, if I go to Nike and every shoe that I click on, it's like, how's your experience? Do you like this? What do you rate this? And I'm like, get out of the way. Like, I'm just trying to buy a pair of shoes. Shut up. Don't do that to people. Like, there are definitely companies who are going to say, no, you have to do this. We are rolling this out. We need to get feedback. Well, there's like smarter ways you can do that. Like, don't go to one extreme or the other. Think about when you need the feedback. You know, especially if it's something like transactional, do it after the transaction, not in the middle of it. Because what that's going to do is it's going to drive people off your site. They're going to say, man, I didn't even get to buy the shoes yet. Like, stop driving me crazy. So definitely weigh those things. The other thing with feedback is like making it optional. I know that seems really silly, but if you are demanding that people give you feedback, the less likely it's going to be accurate. Because what I'm going to do is if you ask for 1 out of 5 stars, I'm probably going to give you 1 because you just forced me to give you a star. And what you really want to do is like, you want people to give you the feedback that's meaningful, that they really wanted to share with you, not just pestering them to death and then being like, well, why, Kelly, now that you're my designer, now we have, 1 stars everywhere. I'm gonna be like, I don't know, because you're pestering people. It really has nothing to do with the design, right? We didn't even ask about the design. We just bugged people. Yeah. Does that help?
Well,
Yeah.
I just wondered if there's it annoys that to me.
Yeah.
My annoyance is actually benefiting some level. Because if it's not different.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm right, like if I'm the designer on that project, I mean, I would be on the side of advocating for allowing people to volunteer that information rather than demanding people do it, and also asking at the right time and not asking too frequently. It's nice to get the feedback. I mean, as a designer, I always want feedback on the things that we're rolling out to people, but you don't want to overdo it either. Yes, exactly. Yes, incentives are fantastic. You want to incentivize people to give you feedback, but you don't want to bribe them for feedback, right? Because if I say, hey, Mikhail, I'm going to give you like a $250 like gift certificate if you'll fill this out, like you're more likely to give me 5 stars and everything, right? You'd be like, yes, actually loved it, loved it, loved it. But you you want to, dangle the carrot so that people
If you want the real feedback.
yeah, just, balance it, right?
Like the bands app is like great. Like they'll do something and they'll do like a sticker, like a free sticker, like it's not something that's like, $2% off, but it's like instead of it doesn't persuade the person.
Exactly. It's like a little bonus at the end, right? Rather than the carrot.
It's like,
Any other questions? Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Is there anything about the Amazon navigation you could change?
All of it? All of it? All of it. Yes. I find it very overwhelming. In fact, there was something,
So,
yeah,
we got this many out.
yes, they failed the magical number of 7. But part of me also feels for their information architecture team because I can't even imagine trying to categorize, like, I would not even wager how many products they have put in the millions. So, I sympathize with them.
We go here, or any one of these.
Yes. I'll tell you, I logged on my Amazon app recently because my kids were renting a movie over and over and over and over and over again. And I was like, I need to stop this. And I got on the app and I couldn't find an Amazon Prime where to actually keep them from doing that. I was like, okay, it's got to be in here somewhere. And I spent 30 minutes trying to find it. So
That's
yeah.
another issue.
It is. Yes, disparate products. Yeah. Somebody else had their hand up. Yeah.
It's a really weird question. Do you have an opinion on
I have lots of opinions on dark mode. I think, yeah. I think people have very strong opinions about dark mode. Some people love them, some people hate them. I think it's important, again, to consider context. I'll give you an example. Working on like a Bloomberg terminal. If you were to redesign the Bloomberg terminal and make it light theme, all of them would lose their minds collectively, right? So you have to kind of understand the historical context of whatever it is you're working on. If it is a terminal, probably needs to be dark mode. Something for your TV, very good for dark mode because people are typically watching TV or movies in the dark. You don't want to like shock their senses when the movie goes off and it's like really, really white and vibrant. Anything in between those extremes can be a little more nuanced, but I think the easiest way to decide is to talk to people, talk to your like target audience, your end users, see what they prefer. And if you don't know, there, especially with phone apps, it can default to like system settings. So you can always allow people to choose rather than like determining one way or the other. It's a little bit harder for like desktop apps. Yeah, does that help? Yeah, I have lots of opinions personally, but as general practice, not so much.
I was just schemes, it's a little bit like the feedback. Well, sometimes.
Yeah.
Get up there, like, oh, this is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Go back,
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know if I don't know if I even have an opinion about it.
Yeah.
If other people who are smarter than me form it.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of along the lines, actually, I was doing some research, putting this presentation together, whether on dialog boxes, whether the primary button should be on the left or the right, or before or after the like cancel action. And there's no consensus on that either, believe it or not. Like Material does it one way, iOS does it a different way. You know, the OK and cancel can be here and here, or they can be here and here, or they'll be over here. And it seems like there's no real impact to efficiency, but it says like general guidance, if you're designing an iOS app, match iOS standards. If you're designing for Android, match Android standards, so you're not making people like relearn. But if it's like a web app, it's kind of up to you. So yeah, similar with dark mode, it can just be personal preference. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Say if you would elaborate more
On fonts, did you say? Yeah. So I don't know if there's like there's probably some kind of guidelines around this. For picking a second font, generally they can make things more visually interesting, but only if they're chosen like with, you know, deliberate purpose behind them. I see it a lot where, you know, the font in the UI will be one, and then the button is a different font. I don't know if there is like a designer who just on a whim decided to change that. I don't know if there's general guidance around it. The other differentiator can be like your headings can be one and your body font might be another one. I see that a lot, especially on websites. And I also see it a lot with like agencies where they just like want to get fancy and make it visually interesting. But I don't know that there's like a real guiding principle there other than just make sure that it is cohesive, that it flows really nicely, and that you're following kind of basic typography principles. Like I said, make sure the line height isn't something crazy. Not necessarily. I don't think it's going to introduce any problems. Like I said, unless you're using like Comic Sans and some other like font that doesn't look like Comic Sans, right? People are going to see that and be like, I don't know, something looks off, but no one's going to be like, oh, it's that font and that font. That's the problem. Like I said, most people aren't as, you know, up on design, which is fine. You don't really need people to be. You just need to make sure that you're not drawing attention to things that are less thought out. You don't want people, like if they're going to enter their credit card on your site and you've used Comic Sans throughout the site, I wouldn't give you my credit card. So just, you know, being, like I said, being thoughtful about it. Yeah. Otherwise, I think it's mostly aesthetic. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you're talking about separating that, I think in settings and or you're right. Somewhere hidden somewhere. Do you have any tips about clarity for the user? Other than, I guess.
Yeah. You said the search function. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think at a basic level, it comes down to helping guide people down the most common path first. There's a reason that, you know, the very first thing that you see in settings isn't something that they can like delete their account. You know, like there's a reason that you kind of need it to be a little bit buried. It goes back to that intentional friction again. You don't want harmful actions to be the first thing that they see because they might accidentally click them just trying to figure out what it does. So I think there is some logic to the most frequent tasks being kind of the first ones in a list. Same with navigation, like, you know, search is always at the top right. You wouldn't want to bury your search in the settings page, like that's crazy, unless it's search settings, obviously. But you know, just kind of using a little bit of brain power and logics in where you place these things, group similar items together so that if someone is looking at contrast or brightness, that it's under like, you know, visual settings or something that people would know where to find it. And if you're just not sure, my favorite thing to do is look through some apps that you use a lot, see where they have kind of grouped things together, and that'll at least give you somewhere to start. Once you come up with something, you can always, like I said, ask people to go through some tasks and just make sure it's easy for people to find, especially if it's something they have to do a lot. You don't want it to be hard to find. Yeah. Anything else?
That site has a lot of reports. And works great, you know, laptop. When you get to mobile, I mean, there's a lot of data.
Yeah.
My only choice is to use something like Bootstrap. You can grab the plus sign, it only shows everything.
Yeah.
For me, as a user, I'm looking for some of the developers. That's very useful. On mobile, when you turn the sideways, I mean, well, either way, you're gonna end up scrolling. Is that bad, good, or is it just is what it is?
I would say it's bad. And it's not that providing the report is bad. Maybe there is a reason. Maybe it's a report to your CEO that wants to know.
No, this is a report to these users. There's several thousand.
Right. So
There could be, I mean, I'm putting like 25 or whatever they select on their own page, and then there's, you know, page. But I don't know a good way, like 20 columns.
Yeah. And there's not. That's the thing. There's no like magical answer to making that work. What I would say is looking back at your user journey, looking back at what people are trying to accomplish. Maybe, and I'm painting broad strokes here, but maybe your particular users just want to know one thing. Like, what is that thing that they want to know out of the report, and just tell them that. The reason I say that is maybe it's not, I want to sit here and toggle through 25 pages of like 15 column.
It's not really the number of pages, though. It's the number of things on there that just things. I do have some items on there that are just informational and not necessary.
Yep.
So they're good to have.
Yeah.
But I could get rid of them for a moment.
Yes, I would highly recommend that.
Just leave the essential stuff.
Yeah.
And I saw that bootstrap thing. Click it and see the rest of it. Thought that's neat, but my people are going to complain.
Because no one can use it. It's not intended for people to look through 15 column reports on a mobile device. Like that does. There's really no reason you should even really support that mode of use, because it's not practical. They can't see it. They can't navigate it. So I would advocate for placing that information in a place where they would be using it, like you said, on a desktop. You could even display like a placeholder on that page that says, "Hey, we have reports, but you need to be on a desktop to view them." And that way, you're kind of teaching them, yes, they're there. We didn't lose them. We didn't delete them, but they're no good on your mobile device.
I do provide a way to hide
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
But
it's only going to take you so far, though. Yeah. Sounds like it. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming today. I hope that you learned something.
Awesome. We got a couple more questions.
I was going to say one more thing. If you felt like this was helpful and you want to learn more, I'm more than happy to come do like a follow-up conversation where I can cover some more topics that you're interested in. I tried to keep it fairly basic for today. Didn't know, experience levels or anything. But like I said, you can shoot me an email. You can find me at LunarLab.io. And like I said, I'm happy to come back and chat if you found it helpful.
That'll be awesome. We'll definitely take you up on that, especially with some of the more advanced concepts of ADA and other things. We may also, if this is something that everyone's interested in, maybe we can do a series of UX talks that cover more subjects, with you guys headlining, but also, someone who has experience with like ADA stuff or other types of design. That would be awesome. Also, I want to thank Integrate for food. And by the way, we have this room for another 30 minutes. If y'all want to hang out, eat, it's cool. John, would you mind coming up here real quick? So John's our sponsor from Integrate, and you want to tell us a little bit about your. Hey, you want to maybe stand like right there? You want to be on camera? Come on. Come join us on camera.
I failed public speaking.
You're good.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed Jimmy John's. I'm John from Integrate. Also, Aaron Hall back there is director at Integrate. Michael Richardson, Jen Nelson, also part of the family. So if you, we are a demand marketing platform. We're kind of new here in Birmingham, last couple of years, trying to grow. But it's exciting times. 2022 is going to be big. And yeah, we're just glad to sponsor these kind of events and
Are
be
you
a
guys
part of the
still
family.
hiring?
Yeah. Oh man, you name it, we got it. So I think there's 80 plus new jobs coming down the pike just in engineering alone for the new year. So anything from developers, back end, front end, UX, design, sales, you name it, all the things. So we're excited and looking to continue to grow and grow our space here and build something new. We'll see. So all the good stuff.
Thanks, John. Appreciate the food.
Thank y'all.
Thanks for sponsoring.
Yeah.